Hello, everybody, and welcome to One Sustainability. I'm James Rosenstein, a member of the advisory board of One Business World. One Sustainability features entrepreneurs, founders, and business leaders who have sustainability as a core component of their overall strategy, presenting on cutting-edge topics and the latest industry developments. Our goal is to educate and inform the global business and entrepreneurial communities on the importance of sustainability and to promote and support sustainable business growth all around the world. Today, we're very pleased to welcome leading global sustainability expert, advisor, and entrepreneur, Stefan Pagacik. Stefan Pagacik is the founder and CEO of Future4Impact. At Future4Impact, Stefan and his team give every individual the tools and expertise to craft a unique integrated experience, creating sustainable outcomes for their project, portfolio, or organization's business model. The Future4Impact platform provides users with an immersive experience that informs, designs, and calculates sustainable outcomes that can be integrated into different types of internal and external reporting mechanisms. Through his presentation at One Sustainability today, Stefan will be offering a new paradigm whereby communities and regions of the world can lead an economic revolution that levels the playing field for consumers who demand sustainable performance accountability from industry and financial markets. Stefan, it is a great pleasure and an honor to have you here with us today to hear more about digital currency as the new paradigm for ESG verification. Thank you and welcome to One Sustainability.
Well, thank you, James, and thank you to Stelios for inviting me to participate, and thanks to all of you who are watching and listening today. I hope this presentation will be both informative and enlightening for you, and I want to just stay up front. I'm on this learning journey with you. So James was very kind in his introduction about my expertise, but truly, as you're going to see in this presentation, we are at the edge of a new frontier, both for our economy and our society. And environmental social governance and sustainability are going to play a very key role in how we shape our future, not only for present generations, but future generations. So the thrust of this presentation is, and this is something that I know is going to be controversial for people, and that is why the US dollar is not equipped to help us save our planet. I know that's a very big statement, and I know that that's going to ruffle feathers at the Federal Reserve, on Wall Street, and in other parts of our economy, but I don't really care, because the US dollar was based on economic principles that are fast becoming outdated. So what we need is this new paradigm. We need something new to go along with how we are reshaping work, how we are rethinking and producing goods and services, and how we exchange those goods and services across the globe. I want to start off with just a brief overview, if I might, on the alternative currencies. And this, by no means, I want to stress, is the finite list. I'm just picking two here because these are the two most popular. But as you'll see in the presentation, we're going to identify several other alternative currencies that are still in use today and are very, very applicable to solving environmental, social, and governance problems. But the two we're going to look at today right now are digital currency and cryptocurrency. So digital currency is really an electronic model of currency notes and coins. So just think, paper dollar, paper coins, pennies, quarters, dimes. Digital currency is just a representation of that. And it is stored in the digital wallet, which, by the way, is uniform across all these currencies. You're going to have a digital wallet. It's going to take some form or another, and that's where your money of the future is going to be stored. And digital currency can be withdrawn from any ATM or bank. It's using banking standards, so it's just kind of a one level up from the current US dollar standard. Cryptocurrency, on the other hand, is very, very different. This is an encrypted form of digital currency, and that part is extremely important. We're going to get to that in a few moments. Crypto is highly volatile. I think if you even have a cursory knowledge of what cryptocurrency is, you've seen wild swings in Bitcoin, in Ethereum and Dogecoin, and different types of digital tokens are being created, every day. My nephew actually called me last month to tell me he had created his own digital token for a sports fantasy gambling platform. So if you're part of a fantasy football league, you're soon going to be using my nephew's platform to place bets on which players are going to be doing better on any given Sunday. But I'm not advocating it here. I want to make sure that this is not nepotism, and I'm not advocating for what my nephew's doing. I'm just indicating that the creation of currency in the crypto world is very fluid. And so this is something where it lends power to people who are looking to solve serious problems like poverty, like the flow of goods and services, like energy issues. This can be an alternative. And crypto uses advanced blockchain technology. We've all heard of it. The big banks are adopting blockchain technology. Just about any company or institution that wants to have some kind of independent verification are using blockchain technology to provide that independent verification process. So I'm just going to move my screen over here. So what are some of the differences between the currencies? Well, the categories that I've listed here are not an exhaustive list. I just picked these categories because I think that they will be accessible to you. I think you'll understand why they're important. And of course, like encryption, as we just spoke of, is the big one. And for cryptocurrency, you get that via blockchain, you get independent verification and encryption. And why is that important? It means that somebody can't come along and fraudulently copy or steal what it is that you've created. Whereas in the digital currency world, and certainly with what we've seen in the US dollar, there's a lot of fraud. There's fraud with bank checks, there's fraud with dollar bills, euros. Anything that's printed on paper is a target for some kind of malfeasance. So there really isn't that protection built in for digital currency. For current rate, for digital currency, it's relatively stable because, again, it's using the US dollar and coins as kind of a backdrop. It's not a one-to-one, but it is very close to it. So the current rate means that digital currency will be a little more stable. In cryptocurrency, as we've seen, it can be highly volatile. One day, Bitcoin can be worth $356, per token. The next day, it can be worth $1. It can go up and down and up and down and up and down. Now, when the stock market does that, we say, well, it's just a market correction. When it happens in cryptocurrency, that's a little different because you don't have those regulatory and compliance oversight. And that's the thing that scares a lot of people in government and society. It's like, well, if there aren't those controls in place, if there isn't that regulatory body, then what? And so that's something that's going to be evolving over time, because we do want that kind of transparency, as you'll see in the next column here. Transparency is important. It's very high with cryptocurrency. The verification is right there. You can see who verified it. That's really important. So we may have to live with the volatility for a while until we can figure out a market that can balance both regulatory, but a true free market system that is accessible to everyone. And I can't stress that last point strongly enough. With digital currency, there's very little transparency. It's basically standard banking information. And so if you've ever tried to read anything coming from Morgan Stanley or Fidelity Investments or your bank regarding the pages and pages of disclosures, your eyeballs are going to fall out. You just have, it's painful to read that stuff. And half the time, you don't know, what it means. One of the former SEC chairs, whose name escapes me now, this was told to me by a friend, an SEC chair who actually said to my friend one day, he said, when Morgan Stanley sends me these documents, I have no idea what they're trying to say, none whatsoever. So if an SEC chair is saying that, we ought to sit up and take notice, because that's a problem. It's a problem for driving our economy forward through the 21st century. Authority. We have Reserve Bank control throughout the banking system. That's obviously good when we need to put money into the system. You think 2007 and 2008, we had to respond to that. But it's not so good in terms of supporting decentralization, allowing different countries, allowing different regions of the world to say, hey, look, I don't act like the United States. I don't want to be treated like the United States. I have my own economy here. It works for us. These are our growth strategies, and we want to keep it so that people can access this currency and know that the currency is been verified for the transactions that they're doing. And it shouldn't have to come from one ruling body. And then, of course, transaction fees. So you get high fees with any kind of currency. You're going to get, think credit card, right? So, any kind of digital currency backed by the US dollar or aligned with the US dollar is going to have fees. With cryptocurrency, you don't have these fees due to blockchain technology. So I just wanted to go in very briefly here to talk about ESG, environmental social governance, and what this is. What is it? Everybody hears this acronym and they go, "What is ESG, Stefan?" Like I keep hearing that and I don't really know about it. And these are smart people, by the way, but they're not necessarily sort of tuned in to what this really means. The first two letters in this acronym, environmental social, should be pretty straightforward. It really is about measures and guidelines that tell companies and investors, are you behaving in a way that's good for the planet and good for people? That's a very general statement, but that is kind of an overarching theme for environmental and social governance. Is really about how we, govern our institutions and govern our entities. So, and this can vary, from company to company, but ESG is saying, yes, but there are a certain set of guidelines and measures that we need to incorporate in governance that every company should incorporate into their charter. They can say it however they want, but they're going to be called on it based on their performance. And so this is really a set of measures and methodologies that tell investors and companies, this is what's going on in the world. This is how you need to behave and act if you are going to be an ESG compliant company. And let's face it, we are in the Wild West, okay? We are very, very much in the Wild West. We are in the formative stages of what ESG is going to be. I don't believe it's mainstream yet. You hear numbers of the trillions of dollars that are going into ESG investments, and I'm going to show you in just a moment, where a lot of that money is going. But I'm here to tell you that a lot of that money is going into companies that have been like on the S&P 500 for years. And they're going into those companies because investors and fund managers know that those companies can provide a return. So at the end of the day, they're still not completely aligned with ESG in terms of, how a fund or a company should be measured. If we're truly going to measure and verify an ESG investment, we have to be able to get companies to report ethically and transparently on their performance, on their operating performance and their what are called materiality. That's another term, their material product, their material way of acting, what they produce as being in alignment with ESG. And until we get there, we're not going to be mainstream. The money you see going into a lot of these funds is going into traditional blue chip investments. These companies are trying, some of them are trying to figure out what ESG is and how it, can be incorporated into their supply chain, into their day-to-day operations. But at the end of the day, they still struggle with this third bullet point, which is no uniform standards, very few rules for data measurement and reporting, and the methodologies for collecting and analyzing data are confusing or worse. I like to think about this, and for those of you who are old enough as you're watching this, for those of you who are old enough, think back to the personal computer revolution. You had Apple and you had IBM, and then you had Compaq and you had, the knockoffs, right? But there were two standards. There was the Mac operating system, and there was DOS, and then there was Windows. Well, Steve Jobs did not want to play with IBM at all. He wanted nothing to do with IBM. And he sure as heck didn't want anything to do with Microsoft. So he made it as difficult as possible for his computers and his software to talk to IBM and Microsoft-driven computers. Well, that's not the way the real world works. The real world works insofar as people work inside companies that have both Macintoshes and IBMs. And so that basically spawned a whole new industry of networked computing, right? To bring these two together, to try and, make them talk to each other in very technical ways. And I'm not going to go into that, but just to say that it failed for Steve Jobs. He had to eventually come to the point where he had to realize IBM and Microsoft are not going away. I got to figure out if I'm going to grow Apple, if Apple's going to be a Fortune 500 company, we've got to grow Apple, we've got to play with them. And fortunately for Apple, the internet showed up. And the internet really democratized everything. It got everybody on one platform, so it didn't matter whether you had a Mac or a Windows machine. Now you had one platform. That's where we have to go with ESG. We have to get to a point where there's one platform, there's one sort of central place, still decentralized in terms of the way information is calculated, disseminated, analyzed in terms of, decentralization for different countries, different measures and metrics. All of that has to be decentralized, but there has to be sort of one accepted, generally accepted accounting principles like GAAP. There has to be that. If we don't get there, ESG is going to die a very hard death on a hill that they don't want to go on right now. So here is, I got to move my thing over here. Here's the ESG market and sample providers. I want to stress here that the information services market is only one part of ESG, okay? You've got the entire build market for ESG, and that includes building turbines, building blades for wind turbines, building solar panels, green building materials. So I left the build economy out of this in terms of ESG. If you add all this up, it's trillions of dollars that can be spent, that can be invested in making ESG a mainstream marketplace. Some of the sample providers that you have here, Sustainalytics, MSCI, these are examples of what I would call Apple and IBM, right? So they have their own methodology, they have their own quote unquote operating system. Iris Plus, I'm a contributor to Iris Plus. I'm often called upon to create new measures for Iris Plus based on their methodology. Impact Management Project is a terrific platform for understanding, how impact and sustainability affects your project or your company. They do a really good job. They keep it very tight. There's about 20 to 25 measures and guidelines that they use, but it's extremely intuitive and intelligent. And of course, SASB, started by Michael Bloomberg as kind of the alternative to FASB, right? So it's standard accounting sorry, it's the, now slipped my mind. Anyway, it's the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. There we go. I need a drink of water. Here we go. So this is Michael Bloomberg's attempt to get sustainability into the mainstream. And SASB has something called the the SASB Navigator. And the SASB Navigator allows you to go industry by industry and look at the top 100 companies and see how they are performing against other companies in their industry. Unfortunately, because I've played with the Navigator, I spent a day working with it, there are gaps in the reporting, and that's not necessarily SASB's fault. I think some companies, again, are grappling with, what is this methodology? I don't understand how you guys, what are you guys asking me to report on? Where do I find the data? What is it that, you know, I need to do in terms of my report to get on this, inside this Navigator? Companies and investors have a lot of questions around this, and it's hard to get answers from these providers because, again, they have a methodology that's unique to them, and they're not about sharing it. They're not going to let you look under the hood. Worldwide Generation is an up-and-coming platform. It's an extremely interesting and vibrant platform led by an extraordinary woman, Manjula Lee. Manjula gets it like nobody else I've ever met. She really is heart-centered, but she's extremely intelligent. And she has built an extraordinary platform that sort of corrals. And yes, I'm using the Wild West metaphor. I'm going to drop these in to the presentation every so once in a while. So if you're not a Wild West fan, I understand that, but I like Westerns. She has corralled all of these data points, these methodologies, these ways of calculating sustainability, and allowed you as a company to say, well, look, we're in the construction industry, so we're different from banking. So here's our set of criteria. What should we use? Tell us how we should go about doing it. So she's really hit upon, I think, a nerve in the entire industry for addressing both companies and investors. So why digital crypto versus the US dollar for ESG verification? Going back to the first slide, you know, why is the US dollar not equipped to do this? Well, as we've talked about, ESG data is time consuming. You know, it's fragmented, it requires independent auditing that's unbiased. It's unable to, you know, spot anomalies in millions of data points. I mean, it's really, really hard to do this. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is a way to get closer to this. And I believe that AI and machine learning is going to get there. But the US dollar isn't set up to do any of this. It just isn't. It can't, at the end of the day, put a value on any of these activities because it just wasn't set up to do this. Digital crypto, however, it lives in that world. So it knows that world, it knows that language. Remember, we've talked about how these different providers are using different languages, different methodologies. They don't want to talk to each other. Well, digital crypto talks to ESG. It can understand it. It can translate. And that's really critical in being able to value this for the CFO of an organization or the fund manager for an investment firm. That's going to be incredibly critical for them to pass on that reporting to their clients and customers. The US dollar was, you know, it was built on an economic system that frankly is undergoing a radical shift, okay? And I liken it to retrofitting a Model T with a Prius hybrid battery. Really, that's the way I think about it. Would you put a Prius hybrid battery in a Model T? Well, first of all, you can't. The Model T is only in museums, but you wouldn't do it. You simply wouldn't do it. You're talking about advanced technology with a very old system of transportation. Two transportation systems, okay, but very, very different in the way they go about getting you from point A to point B. And digital and crypto, as I mentioned, it allows for technology that's ubiquitous, it's accessible, and it does have the ability to create and value these tokens. And this is really an important point, that it's not the Federal Reserve printing the money. As I just mentioned, you know, my nephew has created a digital token for a particular market need. And as you will see shortly, others have decided that there are alternative currencies that can respond to crises or create an economy or solve societal issues. It can be done. We have the history and we have the proof. And now we have the technology to align with this very, very important way of evaluating data. And finally, this is just my own personal opinion. I believe that we are on the cusp of creating a multi-trillion-dollar global economy based on alternative currency with crypto verification. I believe that this is the next big step in going forward because it allows for a multi-stakeholder valuation. It enables innovation and entrepreneurship to spring up, which creates jobs, which is good for the economy. And it really helps older industries transform to new industries and those individuals who've been working in those industries to gather new skills and look forward instead of backward. So like I said, we do have alternative currencies, and here are a couple. A local exchange trading system, or LETS, which was created in Comets Valley near Vancouver, Canada. This was back in the early 80s in response to 40% unemployment. Unemployment was raging across Northern America, and the defense industry was shutting down, and with it, many businesses. And this particular region of Western Canada decided that they needed to create a mutual credit system such that if you were a hairdresser and you needed to buy groceries, you could go to your local grocer and use this currency system to get what you needed. And that grocer could then go and get the supplies he would need for his store, whether it be, I don't know, shelves or paint or whatever. And again, all of this it's a circular economy. So it circulates, but it keeps businesses open, it keeps people employed, it keeps people fed, and it restores their self-esteem and dignity. They are not tied to an archaic, older system that cannot transform. They now are empowered to do something about what has happened to their region. Time banking is another really interesting currency. It's more around volunteerism. So what it does is it says, hey, your time is really valuable, and we need to place a value on that time such that you ought to be able to take that and buy something else with it. And in fact, Mayor Bloomberg set up time banking for seniors in New York to help with things like elderly services such as ride sharing, home repairs, dealing with insurance, medical insurance, health insurance. And this is extremely valuable, for people who are, struggling, or who are alone, or, who are in some group where they need something that's an alternative to what we currently have. Excuse me. This final point I found in the book, Rethinking Money, How New Currencies Turn Scarcity into Prosperity, by Bernhard Litter and Jackie Dunn. And by the way, I would recommend that you get this book. It is an excellent book. It has many more examples. It shows you, in fact, how our entire economic system is flawed and does not solve the intractable problems like poverty. But this quote from this book is really, this passage from the book really struck me, where Arnold Toynbee said that the demise of 21 civilizations was directly correlated to an excessive concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. Well, what does that sound like? What country does that sound like? How about us, US, right? And the inability of the elite, this is the second one, this one's the key, the inability of the elite to develop changes to the economic system based on socio-political and socio-economic changes. Now, what better example of that last bullet point than the financial crisis of 07 and 08? Because what happened? The rich were bailed out, and those who were middle to low income got stuck with mortgages that were underwater. They got crushed, but the elite were protected. But it did untold damage to the economic system. And again, the US dollar had no way of helping a large portion of society deal with that. And it's Toynbee's theory, and he has, obviously cases that he cites that if this were to happen to us, if we continue down this path and we don't adopt a currency system that is more flexible and adaptable, decentralized, and accessible to the many and not the few, we will go the way of these 21 civilizations. As scary and as dark as that sounds, and you might laugh at it, you might say I'm crazy, that's fine. If you think that way, I will go back to 1993 to a panel discussion that Forrester Research gave on the advent of video on your telephone. And I'll never forget this, but a Forrester analyst speaking at this conference, when somebody asked him, do you think we will ever see video on a telephone? He laughed and he said, there is no way on God's green earth that we are ever going to see video on a phone. Well, here we are in the 21st century, and I'm sure all of you are holding either an iPhone or Samsung or some other handheld phone, and you can watch any kind of video on that phone. So what are some examples of how ESG currency can be applied? These are pretty straightforward. We could create an exchange for sustainable food trading to boost regenerative agriculture. If any of you have seen the movie Kiss the Ground, regenerative agriculture allows us to weather, no pun intended, droughts and violent changes in temperature such that our food systems are protected. And if we had an exchange where we could buy and trade off different food systems around the world, that would encourage the farming industry, I believe, to adopt these principles. Energy conversion exchange, I think this is pretty straightforward. Energy conversion exchange from fossil fuels or renewables. Absolutely, this is something that anybody would want to get into that believes in renewable energy. CO2 emission reduction credits tied to tokens. Kent Carter, who's an expert, he was one of the founders of the Carbon Disclosure Project. He and I had a long conversation about carbon credits, and I asked him very point blank. I said, Kent, why don't carbon credits work? What's the flaw in the system? And he said, Stefan, it's a zero-sum game. You're basically rewarding somebody for bad behavior by saying, yeah, they can go out and just buy off of somebody else's good behavior. Why not create a 90-day contract tied to those credits with tokens underlying that contract that says you got 90 days. All right, you're buying these credits, you're buying time to get your house in order, to get your business model in order, to be more sustainable. And guess what? If you don't, on the 91st day, that contract loses 50% of its value. Start pegging it to value that is open to a larger segment of society and watch what happens with companies' reactions. And finally, open space land trust development, including reforestation. So the Benioffs of Salesforce have committed over $100 million to replanting trees. Hewlett-Packard has a similar initiative. We need more of this. We need it desperately. The Amazon is being bludgeoned. We can't afford this. This is disturbing our climate system at a rate which will eventually lead to sea level rise, which will eventually lead to massive destruction. But we need to create a land trust system and a land trust development program that's tied financially. It can't just be something that philanthropy takes on. I really, truly believe that, we absolutely need to tie this to some monetary system so that people can truly value what it means to have open space. So what could stop us dead in its tracks? The first two, I think, are pretty self-explanatory: Wall Street and the banking system. Again, the control in the hands of the few, the elite, can lead to the demise of a civilization. And so Wall Street and the banking system have a very important question to ask, and that is, are you going to make nice and play with alternative currency systems, or are you going to try and crush it in such a way that it can't live and exist in a decentralized manner? And that is a big question for Wall Street and the banking system to answer. And right now, I don't have a lot of faith that they're going to say yes. I hope I'm wrong. I think the banking system, and in particular institutions on Wall Street, their response to fintech is not to create anything new, it's just to buy it up and basically bury it somewhere. Yeah, Marcus is nice and they're giving some ad space to it, but at the end of the day, it's not central to their business model. It's not central to their strategy. And we know for a fact that in Ireland, when the banks shut down and they went to alternative currency there, when the banks opened up and they saw how successful the alternative currency was, they tried to crush it. They tried to crush it. They put the needs of the bank and its shareholders ahead of the needs of people who were trying to survive famine and unemployment. And to me, that's unconscionable. It is simply unconscionable. So Wall Street and the banking system need to grow a conscience, and I think that's the only way that we're going to be able to live side by side with them in terms of deploying alternative currencies to solve ESG. Government interference. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can completely escape regulatory and compliance. I don't. But I don't want government, getting in the way of creating currencies that benefit the many at the expense of the few. So I kind of walk a tightrope here. Government is important. You do need to have government for some role, but I don't quite know what it is just yet today. But I hope that the powers that be put aside their differences and say, hey, this can be really good for stimulating local economies and getting the states to take back more power and sort of be more self-sufficient. Like, we don't have to bail them out every time something goes wrong. They can actually become more entrepreneurial. I know that's an oxymoron, but live with me on this, or just stay with me on this. I know that's an oxymoron, but if we can do that, and if government can empower rather than interfere, we have a better shot. We really do. China. Need I say more? I think, China is there. We can't ignore them. We cannot ignore their leadership. I think that it was telling in the recent COP26 Glasgow summit, where President Biden and Xi Jinping tried to get together on climate resolutions for the two countries working to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But I found a comment by Xi very telling in that, and this was in respect to US interference in Taiwan. I found his comment very telling, where he said, the Chinese people, we the Chinese people, will not be imposed upon. We will not be told what to do, and we will not be harmed in any way. Well, harmed can mean a lot of things. It can mean physical harm, but it can mean financial harm. And so I looked at that quote and I thought, I think he's talking just as much about undermining China's, system of how they do business, and not wanting Western influence as much as anything else. I think, they're not so worried about the South China Sea. They may be concerned about Taiwan, but they sure as heck don't want another country coming in and dictating terms to them on their economy or on, how to perform. And all you have to do is ask Alibaba about that, or Tencent. And then finally, the tech Goliaths. Look, Facebook and Google, I'm terrified. I'll say this right up front. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of their might, of their strength, and what they could do if they got their hands on a system where they could control our financial lives. There is no fiduciary duty that belongs with the tech Goliaths. There just isn't. And the one I'm really worried about is Amazon, and for good reason. They're buying up all of retail, all of consumer. They want control of your mind and your pocketbook. And it won't be long before they figure out a way to do that such that you are owned by them, literally owned by them. It is terrifying to me how much power they have, and they are the ones that I worry about the most. So what's next? For us at Future4, we're seriously looking at alternative currencies. We're looking at different models for how we would apply it. And so that means that we're looking, at low-hanging markets. And, thinking of doing it in conjunction with a Coinbase or another provider. We're just not sure yet. We're examining the different possibilities. We're also toying with the idea of partnering with a financial firm, but we're not really sure that we can necessarily trust them to be in alignment with who we are as a firm, and that they will really get how important ESG is to our economy and to our society. We want to build a platform. Obviously, we want to build something with market validation. We are not sure if we're going to issue our own currency. We're still talking about that, but we definitely will have a verification system that's built into everything that we do. And so if we do issue, it will be tied to that system. And then the final one, and this is, believe me, this is going to be the hardest one, is aligning ESG providers with offerings, or using a partners firm's ESG partners. And frankly, I think this is going to be the biggest stumbling block, because again, as I pointed out in this presentation, ESG providers, data providers, are just not pro on working with each other. They want to take the market for themselves. They're not interested in sharing that market. So I just think it's going to be hard, that final step. And we have alternative strategies that we can work with, and wait for them to catch up. We're not going to wait for them, necessarily. They can come to us whenever they want, but we're not going to stand there and get into the middle of a shouting contest between them. We're just not interested in that. So with that, I want to thank you all very much. I hope this was informative. I hope this was helpful for you. If you come away with one or two ideas on how to think about ESG in the vein of alternative currencies, then I've done my job. And again, many thanks, James and Stelios. I truly enjoyed this, and I hope you did as well.
Well, Stefan, thank you very much for this presentation, which is such an innovative view of the future. And I do have a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
As we know, there are many frameworks that are used around the world for the assessment of ESG performance. In Europe, it's more developed than in the United States, where you have in certain countries, like Denmark and others, where you have compulsory reporting every year on ESG issues within a framework. And they're similar, but also different in different places around the world. And then we have different systems. You mentioned SASB, there's also GRI, the examination of materiality and the basis for all this. And I was wondering if in the development of this vision of things being handled within cryptocurrency, would there be a link between that and a kind of overall general framework that would be accepted as a foundation for this? And to what extent would that be accepted around the world? As we've seen with COP26, there is agreement on a number of things, but also many countries that do not wish to agree.
It's a great question, James. And, frankly, I don't have a good answer at this point. I have many European colleagues, and they, their view is that obviously Europe is further ahead, and even country by country, there's differing acceleration of ESG. I think there was a hope that the Paris Climate Accord, would be a step in the right direction, but clearly when politics become involved and when politicians become involved, then it becomes, like going to a casino. You're essentially rolling the dice and hoping that they will vote, uniformly with everybody else. But the chances of that happening are slim to none. And it's because we're humans, and because we have different agendas. And I alluded to this in the presentation. Until we get away from that, until we're able to put the agenda of society and regions around the world ahead of getting votes, or ensuring that I'm taken care of versus somebody else being taken care of. And really a perfect example of this, James, is, and it comes out of COP26, is the decision to create a fund for poorer countries, developing countries, that actually are creating 50%, I think 50% of greenhouse gas emissions is being emitted by 14 countries. The other 50% is being emitted by the poor developing countries, of which their populations and their size are minuscule compared to the developed world. Yet they are grappling with huge amounts of GHG emissions, but they can't afford to pay for the solutions. They don't have the money. They don't have the economy to do it. So they're turning to the developed world and saying, help us here. Give us a way for us to join with you to reduce. And yet still these are, the developed world, and the United States included, the pledges just aren't enough. The pledges of capital aren't enough. And actually, truth be told, we need more than capital. What we need to do is go in there and teach these countries advanced systems of thinking and building. Because if we do that, we have a better shot of them reducing their greenhouse gas emissions than if we just threw $100 billion at them. It just is, you're dealing with government, which means that you have the potential for corruption and malfeasance, and that's not going to do it. So I'm sorry to be pessimistic about this, but I really can't see how we're going to come together as one uniform standard body unless we have something like the Paris Climate Accord, unless we have an agreement, or like Bretton Woods, something that brings these nations together to say, all right, we're 14 of the most powerful nations in the world, and we're agreeing to these standards. And now we're going to turn our attention to helping the poorer countries adopt these standards. We will help them with material, with infrastructure, with money, and with expertise. If we do that, we've got a puncher's chance.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, one more thing. You did say that anything printed on paper is a target for malfeasance. Well, as you know, there have been many cases where cryptocurrency has been used for ransomware and things like that. And therefore, don't you think that there's also this risk with cryptocurrencies?
Yes, I do. I think whenever you create any kind of tool or service, you are opening yourself up to somebody who's going to try and re-engineer it or do something with it that has a evil purpose. We just can't get away from it. I default to human nature. That's the way it is. However, with crypto, unlike digital currency and other currencies, we have the backstop of verification by the blockchain. So if we can improve upon the blockchain to make it almost like downloading a security app, and I'm just going to put up my pixel here. So if I have a security app on the phone, is it 100%? No, but it's close. It's better than not having it. So I think as we continue to develop technologies in the cybersecurity area, and that's going to be a focal point going forward as crypto unfolds, because that's natural that people could undermine cryptocurrency. That was another pun, I think. Anyway, to your point, James, there is the very real possibility, but I believe that it's harder when you have a backstop of blockchain or other type of technology. And there will be another iteration of blockchain. People are looking at this and saying, well, if we are trying to manage transactions in the trillions of dollars or trillions of Bitcoin or Dogecoin or Ethereum, depending on how much is actually created and mined, there is going to have to be something that comes behind it that says, wait a minute, you can't issue more, because this is where we stop. And so anything that goes beyond this is fraudulent. So I think we have a better shot at catching that with crypto than we do with the US dollar.
Yeah, I understand that. And, I've spoken to experts who have actually said that blockchain is going to be the basis of the whole new internet system. This is something that could happen.
Yeah, it could. It could. And I'm also curious to see how AI and machine learning, because we're going to be going autonomous, right? So there's a lot of autonomous, like robots, self-driving cars. So you're going to have systems in these autonomous vehicles or autonomous beings that are going to be constantly monitoring. And I think that constant near real-time or real-time monitoring is where, and liken it to this, if I, on my shirt, had wearable technology right now that was monitoring all of my bodily functions, it could easily alert me by pricking me like this. And I go, oh, geez, okay, something's not right there. In the same vein, we could do that with our economic system, with transactional systems. We have already red flags and alerts that banks, can text to your phone, but that takes too long. That actually is not fast enough. It has to get to a point where, as the transaction's happening, it gets stopped, paused, and you're alerted through wearable technology or some other system that says, hi, Stefan, this charge for $1,263 is going through from Bora Bora. Did you, order these wind chimes? But no, I didn't. And to quickly, using my voice, tell my wearable technology, cancel the transaction.
Yeah.
Because you can always go back and reorder.
Yeah.
But you can't go find the thief who did that if they're living in, the crypto world.
Yeah. Okay, Stefan, this has been so interesting and important, and I want to thank you once again for your time and your presentation as part of the One Sustainability series. It's a major contribution. So thank you very much again, and we look forward to future contact to continue our conversation.
We will continue our journey. James, thank you so very much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.